and welcome to the fourth and sadly last day of the 8th edition of the Sofia International Literary Festival. We're ready for our next meeting in the international program, and it is a meeting with our favorite short story writer, Etgar Keret. Manol Peykov will be our moderator. I hope they're both ready. Manol, as far as I know, is in Plovdiv, and Edgar is abroad. Right now, you are seeing our interpreters, Martin Petrov and Yoana Stoyanova, on the screen. They will be helping us so we can hear the conversation, which will originally be in English. You can hear it in Bulgarian as appropriate for a Bulgarian literary festival.
Are we on?
Отлично.
Yes.
Започваме ли? Да.
Hi, Edgar.
Здравей,
Hi.
Едгар.
Great to see you after so many months of Corona. How are you?
Great. I almost came to Sofia twice, but every time there was was something out there that stopped me from coming. But I hope that I'll be able to come soon.
Yeah. Yes, to those who are looking at us and listening to us, we should say that right before the last Corona lockdown, Edgar and I had an agreement that he would visit with his entire family. He would come to Bulgaria in late November, but most unfortunately, this coincided with the second wave, both in Israel and in Bulgaria. So we're hoping to catch something between the second and the third, or between the third and the fourth. What do you think?
Yeah, any excuse to come. It's really, I want to say, I think Bulgaria is really maybe the only countries in which I have more friends than readers, so I have to go and meet them.
Wow. Does it mean that you have too few readers or that you have too many friends?
No. I have so many friends, so I need to come again.
I'm really glad to hear that. Yes. You've been here 5 times already, so a 6th is forthcoming, hopefully very soon. So how is Tel Aviv? What is the weather like right now?
Well, we had a couple of nice days, like sunny, but everybody is too busy thinking that we're going to go in for a third lockdown, because now it's one of those weeks when you have more and more cases. And on top of that, we have all this kind of entire political chaos, in a government, and nobody's really knowing what's going on, as in many countries, I'm sure, So it's kind of like, I think that the thing about the Corona times, that you tend to forget what month it is, and what's their election, and is it Christmas, Every day kind of seems a little bit like yesterday. It's not necessarily bad, it's just kind of a different time conception.
I absolutely agree. How has it been for you in terms of writing, in terms of combining things, in terms of not being able to travel? You usually have at least a dozen tours a year, or even more. So how has it been as an experience?
Well, I must say that I was afraid in the beginning that if I won't travel, things will be too slow for me, because I like kind of jumping from plane to plane and meeting people all over the world and going on my Indiana Jones literary adventures. But but when I stayed home, I realized that life inside my apartment was just as exciting, with my son, my wife, my rabbit, my friends. It was exciting enough, and I find this period very inspiring. I want to say that that I usually write more when times are more difficult. Usually when things are good, I have less of an urge to write. But now, with all the COVID and the anxiety and boredom that comes from lockdowns, and and frustration, then it's very, very easy to find stuff to write about.
Maybe a novel at last?
I'm not sure, but I'm writing right now kind of a little bit stuff that is more kind of sci-fi in nature. So even if it's not a novel, it's something that can be developed, I don't know, to a feature film or to a TV series, because it's all about kind of alternative universes and different ontologies.
Wow, that sounds like an exciting move. Very much in the vein of your first story, Pipelines. It was about different universes, but in a more abstract way, I should say.
Yeah, it's not even when I write sci-fi, it's not really sci-fi because I have very little interest in the science, but I think it's like those kind of fables that take place in worlds that are more advanced.
Start to the backside of online work. Okay, let's first tell our listeners and viewers that your new book in Bulgarian, entitled "Fly Already" in English, in Bulgarian it's "Авария на края на галактиката." So we're following much closer the original Hebrew title. It's going to come out next week. This is your seventh book in Bulgarian, believe it or not. You have 6 books of short stories and 1 children's book published already here. And this is the first one that's being translated from the original Hebrew. Up until now, we had the translations from English, the wonderful work of Milena Varzanovtseva. Now Joseph Benato has done, I think, has done a great job. I'm sure that you have many fans waiting for the book. I could see that there were many pre-orders of the book, so certainly, people are keenly waiting to read the book. Could you tell us a little more about how this collection is similar to or different from your previous collections?
Well, it's funny because I think in many ways, if I think about the zeitgeist of this collection, it's kind of it's a book about the time of the COVID, which was written before the time of the COVID, because I think it's a book that talks a lot about people who live in a world that keeps changing, in which there are different rules and different regulations, and they don't totally understand what they're expected to do. It tells many stories about people who are isolated, who are in spaces where they can't always come out, either they're being jailed or being treated. It talks a lot about the need for companionship, whether it's human or not human. So, in a strange way, I think that it deals with many topics that we deal with now in the time of the pandemic, but it preceded them, because what I really think is that what happened in the pandemic didn't invent new problems. It just exposed old ones. The way that it always works with a virus always attacks the weakest systems in your body. And the same goes for social structures. So I think that this idea of a word that stopped making sense had existed long before the pandemic hit us, but now it's kind of surfacing our distrust of systems, of government system, of the media, our inability to predict what's going to happen next. It was all always here, but somehow in the time of the pandemic, it's kind of like erupted. And that's why I really feel that this is my most up-to-date book ever, because I wrote it before the era had arrived.
How was it perceived by the audiences, first in Israel and then, of course, around the world, because it has already been translated into a number of languages? What was the reception?
So I think both in Israel and in the US, they kind of see it, I think, as my most, I don't know, a adult or I don't know, deep book, the most literary book. I don't necessarily feel the same. I think that it's just as playful, but this is what the reviews say. I got the Sapir Prize, which is basically like the Israel equivalent of the Booker Prize. for this collection. And what happened, which was strange, that it came out during lockdowns, both in France and in Holland. And I think that in both of those countries, it's my most popular books there ever, even though that it came out during lockdowns. Somehow people found a way of buying it. I don't know how, because in Israel, the lockdowns had killed the book industry. You were unable to buy book or get books, and in Israel, ebooks are not very popular. So right now in Israel, the book scene is in a standstill. No new books are being released, but apparently, in other places, like in France and in Poland and in other places, the book is coming out during the time of the pandemic, and it seems to be doing very well.
I've been surprised how the Bulgarian bookstores have reacted to the pandemic, because initially we thought the market will be devastated, but then the online sales really picked up, and people started buying books directly from publishers, especially small publishers that have very keen audiences that people are sympathetic about. And looking at the results compared to last year, I should say that we have even picked up a little more sales, which has surprised me greatly. I mean, for this year.
Yeah, but the problem is that in the long run, that it shouldn't kind of create a structure that will basically close down the independent bookstores, because sometimes, like, I think that again, whenever there is a challenging time, the bigger and richer you are, the better chance you have to deal with it. And I think that it's wonderful that there is such an intimate connection between readers and independent publishers. But I just hope that the independent bookstores will also find a way to survive.
Yeah. My impression is that in crises like those, the biggest and the smallest are those who are able to do best, and those who are in the middle usually they do not have enough resources, but at the same time they have too much. The expenses are too high. When you're too small, you can survive without any resources. Yeah.
I agree with you. I agree. I think that as a law of, I don't know, economy, it's a pretty nice one, that at least it gives the small one a chance to survive too. I wish that life out, everywhere would be as fair.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I wanted to say a few words about your new short film. We just aired it. You can say that we premiered it in Bulgaria yesterday. The small independent, I'd say, online media Toest premiered outside in Bulgarian. It's Navan. Your short film done in Pinto, an Israeli choreographer. I personally think it's absolutely stunning, and it reiterates an old review that I read years ago about your first book, where an American reviewer mentioned the fact that in 6 paragraphs you can say more than many people can say in a novel of 600 pages. And this particular short movie is an absolute epitome of this ability of yours. I mean, it's beautiful and stunning. I urge people to search it and to see it. They've missed it.
It was an attempt, because I really love Inbal Pinto's work for stage as a choreographer, and it always has some kind of a fairy tale or fable quality, and the story in which we base this short movie is actually a very hyper realistic psychological one. But when I realized that I have a chance to work with Inbal Pinto, I said to her, how about we'll make it like an Alice in Covidland story? Basically, take the sensibility of Alice in Wonderland, take this kind of naivety of a children's fable, and try to mix it with the consequences of the pandemic. And Inbal is really, really amazing in taking basically miniature situations, as if like, you know, drinking a cup of tea, or I don't know, putting a sugar in it and making an entire kind of a spectacle out of it. So the idea of confining somebody or isolating a character and still making her existence an exciting one was not a difficult challenge for Imban. It was and it was a great adventure for us to work together. I've never worked I've worked with dance groups, but I've never collaborated with a choreographer on a one-on-one kind of a project like this one.
I was surprised because I was the one who translated the subtitles. So I watched the movie very closely and the text, and I was surprised, really surprised, stunned how many people have worked on that movie. You have on the one hand an Israeli crew, and on the other hand the Japanese crew. What was it like? I cannot really imagine what it's like to work online with those people across continents. What was the experience?
So I would say that, you know, more than I felt like a director, the way that I usually feel on the set, I felt like I was some leader of a group of cultural partisans. You know, it felt like an underground because we did it with very little budget. You know, the furniture in the movie were basically taken from my late mother's apartment and colored in green, because my mother always liked art, so I said, okay, she would probably approve. You know, there are scenes there where the walls are moving. So Shira, my wife, and the husband of the dancer were the people pushing the walls. So it was very, very kind of guerrilla style. And the entire shooting in Japan was really like the cultural attaché in Japan, the Israeli cultural attaché. He became our Japanese producer, cooking to the crew, you know, making them hummus and falafel. And basically, in Ban and me, we had to direct via WhatsApp or Zoom because you know, when they were shooting there, it was basically on the level of somebody holding his mobile phone and saying this is the frame, or putting a laptop and saying, okay, now this is the shot. And I never had the chance to work like that, but actually there was something also beautiful and wonderful in it, because it kind of cut all the fat from filmmaking. You know, usually when you make films, then it's all about professionalism and what you should do and what you shouldn't do and what the union would say and stuff like that. And when we worked, it was just kind of like a bunch of people who wanted to do something against all odds, and we really wanted to put this short movie out there. And you know, and when we were able to screen it so far in Shibuya Crossing in Japan, it's the most busy crossing in the world, and in Times Square in New York, and on the wall of Israel's National Theater. And the idea of making a movie about pandemic and being able to show it in a open social spaces that are now semi-empty. You know, all those places that used to be full. It gave me this kind of feeling that as an artist, I'm able to acknowledge a reality, because too many times, you know, I feel that I if they publish a story of mine right now, it would be a story I've written 3 years ago. If they screen a movie of mine, it will be a movie that I've made in a different reality. And the ability to basically sit down, make a movie about what's going on, screen it, and put it out to the world is really a huge gift, you know. And it's not always that artists in general, and especially writers, get to do that.
The movie, I could say that it deals with a very important question: do we learn from our mistakes? Many people have been, you know, discussing the current situation with the coronavirus pandemic and the fact that it has kind of it's been positive in a way, because people have started seeing the important things in life. They have more time for things, for the nature, for poetry, the things that are really fundamental to our existence. We somehow have eyes to see them, and in a way, your movie deals with the same subjects. Your heart softens during the pandemic. And of course, I know very well that your punchline should be seen more as a metaphor than as your personal opinion. But what do you think? How will this pandemic change us, change the world?
Well, the interesting thing for me about the pandemic was really to see how people react to the same phenomena in such a different way. How the pandemic is some kind of a Rorschach stain, that different people see different things. Because for me, the intuitive message I got from the pandemic was that we're all in it together, that all humanity shares a fate, that we have a mutual responsibility for people in our society and for people in other countries in a way that, for example, that the Americans will have to internalize for the first time. It's not that if I'm an individual, if I take my vitamins and I exercise and I pay my taxes, my life will be good. If my neighbor can't afford, to take care of himself and he'll catch the virus, I'm going to be next. So I thought that there was something very unifying about this message. But when you listen to Donald Trump speaking about the Chinese virus, you realize that it can also be leveraged in a xenophobic way, saying, you should stick with the people that are close to you, suspect everybody who looks a little bit different. People who are coming from out of towns, they must be carrying either a virus or bad ideas about social orders, So in that sense, I really felt that, for example, I give you two things, One thing is that, during the coronavirus, we don't fly as much as we used to. So from an ecological point of view, it's kind of a saves us, from ourselves, because we keep the ecology in a better state. But for example, in Israel, in the time of the pandemic, it was the perfect reason to tap to people's phones, by the Israeli Secret Service, and to make sure that you are not next to a corona patient. So the question is, which of those two is going to stay after the pandemic is over? Will we keep flying less, or will the government keep monitoring us? I think that this choice is going to affect our future. And in that sense, I want to say that the pandemic never created a reality. The pandemic is just like, I don't know, a filter on our Instagram. It can make things look more black and white. It can make our lips look nicer. It could make blend with us. But in the end, it's us. There are people who are generous in time of pandemics. There are people who are aggressive in time of pandemic. There are people who keep their optimism in time of pandemic. There are people who are even more depressed in time of pandemic. So in the end, I can imagine, that we can live through different genres in this period. This could be the musical about the pandemic, or the tragedy about the pandemic, or the thriller about the pandemic, or the porno film about the pandemic. We're going to bring our content into it. It's just we cannot blame it on the virus, because what I really dislike is some kind of a victim narrative that many of us can use, saying, oh, life used to be so wonderful and then this virus happened to us. So life wasn't that wonderful to begin with, and we can keep it exciting and interesting and groundbreaking even through the pandemic. Of course, we've all suffered economically, some of us more than others. We've lost people that we've known. We're physically threatened. I have a background disease. I'm asthmatic. I'm afraid to get corona. But at the same time, with all those facts, we are still the same people, and we can still pick the fights that we want to pick, and we can still see the beautiful things that we want to see. And as you said, there is something about the pandemic. It's a little bit as if we've been living next to a highway, and now when the cars and the trains are not moving, we can listen to the cricket and listen to the birds, and those crickets and birds could be beautiful, but they could also be horrible. I know personally, like families that in the time of the lockdown decided that they don't want to live together. You know, when they were in high-tech business and seeing each other only 3 hours a day, they seemed to have a perfect family. When they had to stay 24/7, they discovered that they don't like their partners and children as much as they thought they did. So there is something revealing in it. You know, it's not necessarily a positive experience, but it could be a very earnest one. And this sends me back to my father, who always said, you know, my father was a Holocaust survivor, that he always refused the term bad times in life. And he always said to me, there are easy times and difficult times. This is the dichotomy. And when after thinking about it, and he said, and you know what, in the difficult times, you get to learn about yourself more. So nobody wants difficult times, nobody wants a pandemic, but since we already have it, then it would be a shame if we won't make something out of it and just settle for some kind of narrative that we've been raped by nature or murdered by nature and had nothing to do or to learn from this experience.
Thanks. That was yeah. We already have questions from our chat, so let me read you a few.
Of course.
The first one comes from Neva.
Neva!
Yay, she says, Edgar, we are missing you. That's how it's written, with many A's. Edgar, we're missing you. Tell us about the mini-series that you did with your wife, Shira Geffen, The Agent. Why in France? Why with Matteo Amalric in the main part? What was the premiere like in May? And is there a chance that we could see it online in Bulgaria? And where could we see it? And above all, how did you prepare for the parts, for your own part in that miniseries?
Great. Oh, so the miniseries called La Jeanne Immobilier. It was made for Arte France, and the story behind this miniseries that Shira, my wife, and I had made together, written and directed together, was that it's basically about a crazy real estate guy that is kind of based after me. It's like kind of a grotesque, crazy version of myself. And the thing was that we were going around with this project for a few years, and nobody wanted to pick it up because, you know, it involved a talking goldfish that gives legal counseling to our, you know, he reads the contract of the real estate guy. It involved traveling in time traveling, all kinds of weird and crazy stuff. And and the thing was that at some stage, while we were looking for the best partner to do it with, we've met Matteo Amalric. Matteo Amalric, he played in many movies like The Butterfly and the Diving Bell, Grand Hotel Budapest, Roman Polanski's film like Venus in Fur. He was the bad guy in the first Daniel Craig James Bond movie Quantum of Solace. And he agreed to read a few of my stories in a literary event in the Odeon in Paris. And when he read my stories, he did something that I never saw before, because usually when an actor reads your story, he plays the character, he plays the narrator. But when Mathieu read my stories, he actually played me. He saw me reading my stories, and when he read my stories, he imitated me, not in a shallow way, but in a deep way. All my anxieties and my fascination of things that kind of make me lose focus about what I'm actually trying to talk about. And when we saw him reading my stories, then Shira said to me, you know, I think we found our guy, because we never understood who's going to be the perfect actor to do this show. And the show is only on the actor. He appears in every scene in the show. The entire universe is a subjective reflection of what he experiences. And when we realized that we wanted Mathieu, we started approaching with our producer Yael Fugere. We started approaching French broadcasters like Arte, and they were nice enough to do it. But we found ourselves basically writing a series in Hebrew, having it translated to French, and directing actors in French, which is a language that we don't speak. So it was a very challenging and interesting project. And in this project, also, our son Lev had played the son of the bad guy, and me and my brother, we played the two anti-Semite Polish caretakers in an elderly home. So basically, I don't speak a word in French, and my character doesn't speak a word in French. So I just needed to have a very nice Eastern European mustache and to go around with a big hammer and look very intimidating. So it was an easy role. And since the series came out, it had been broadcasted in Mexico, in Israel, and now I hope in other places. And I really, really hope that it will reach Bulgaria. If there will be anyone who wants to broadcast in Bulgaria, I promise personally to go to the producers and beg and ask them for favor to not to be greedy and to give the series or to give it for something symbolic, just so people in Bulgaria will be able to see how the word looks inside my mind and not only on the page. Because of course, also the series is based on some of my short stories like Breaking the Pig and other stories that involve real estate guys and goldfish. So I think it's the first time I was able to bring my inner word to the screen in a way that I'm totally happy with. I did other projects that I liked as projects, but they didn't feel like the stories. And this series feels very much to me like the stories feel to me when I write them.
Great. I promise we will start thinking, looking for somebody, to.
Yeah, and you can always tell them that it had huge, like it had wonderful reviews, but it had almost unprecedented ratings for it. I think more than 2 million people saw it in France. And the real reason was that it was aired during the lockdown. But if you ever find a Bulgarian broadcaster, you don't have to tell them that. You can just say, "Oh, so many people saw it," and maybe they'll think it's a blockbuster.
Fair enough. Let me read out a second question. Just a second. Going through the chat. The second one is from Antonia Nacheva. She actually wrote it in English. You have such a huge arsenal of short stories. Has anyone ever reached out to you to share that they have found a part of themselves in your stories? A dream or an inner voice, a fantasy, or something else that corresponded with their thoughts?
I can think of a few such situations that were all very moving, but I think that it will be difficult to communicate them in a dialogue. But I have one story that is a little bit more kind of plot driven, and that was that I once gave a reading in a very small village in the outskirts of Israel. And it was very early on in the beginning of my career. And after I finished the event, there were a few people who wanted me to autograph their books and ask questions. And there was one young, beautiful girl that was waiting in the corner, and she refused to interact with me before all the other people had left. And the moment they had left, she came to me and was very aggressive. And she said to me, "You're shameless. You're such a bastard. You're an asshole. I hate you." And I was very shocked because I didn't know this girl. And I said to her, "What did I do? What did I do?" And she said, "You took the story that my boyfriend had written about me, and you claimed that you wrote it." And then I realized that the story that I've read during that reading, which was for my first collection of stories, was a story that apparently her boyfriend had copied in his handwriting and had sent it to her saying that he wrote it about her. And this was a very awkward situation because really I realized how much she loved her boyfriend and how much she was unwilling to acknowledge what was obvious, that the book had existed long before her boyfriend had copied the story from it. But being in this situation, I couldn't bring myself to say to her, hey, you know, your boyfriend lied to you. And I just found myself, I kept apologizing, and I'm saying, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. I really feel so bad. I shouldn't have came here. I shouldn't have come here, you know, because this was what I felt. You know, I felt that going there was kind of burst some kind of a bubble. But still at the same time, to think that somebody could read a story and think this story was written about me meant that I was able to reach some kind of an intimacy with this girl, even if it's through some kind of a surrogate.
There's a third question now. It's from Daniel Dimitrov. Would Edgar, it's a very concrete question. Would Edgar write a script for a Simpsons episode? A series which is just as crazy, in my opinion, as his short stories. And if he would be willing to write one, what would it look like?
Oh, well, you know, I first have to find the right story for it. But like, if I could choose my animation series to write an episode for, I would go for Rick and Morty, which is my favorite ever animation for TV. But I like The Simpsons and South Park too, and if they would ever ask me to try and write for them, I would happily do so. I think that I would put Bart Simpson. He would work for Domino's Pizza, but just for the promotions, they will open a branch on the moon, offering to do deliveries in the entire solar system. And Bart would be sent there as a presenter, and we'll probably have this little space scooter where he would deliver pizzas to aliens in and outside of the solar system, or something like that. Or maybe, I don't know, I still have to figure it out.
Okay, did you just invent that now? Were you working on it already?
No, the truth is that I have another idea about that has to do with the moon. But no, but this Bart meeting aliens and feeling bad that the aliens give you very little tip. You know, they don't tip you, or I don't know, or they order pizzas with the living creatures on them. They try to eat you while you try to deliver them, like a cannibal pizza with cannibalistic fruits that basically eat the person who orders that pizza. You know, the moment that you go to outer space, strange things can happen.
Everything is possible, indeed. There's a fourth question just came in. It's from Vanya Hinkova. She says, Edgar, just a second. Edgar, we saw each other a few years ago at the house of the architect. It was raining cats and dogs, and it was a real adventure to get from Ruse up north from the Danube River to Sofia with my husband, because the roads were inundated. We were successful, and it was an unforgettable evening for us. I also have asthma, and in fact, this short story that you wrote, the first one in your first book in Bulgarian, was the reason quite some time ago for me to fall in love with your writing. My question is, if you have time or air for just one last word, what would it be? Best regards from the Danube River and from me. That's a bad one.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about So I was asked in a pre-event to think of an epitaph for my tombstone, so I can use that epitaph, and it's a life is just a short story. I wish it was a novel.
I like it. Yeah, okay. If I outlive you, I promise to put it on your grave.
Okay.
Okay, listen, there's just a fifth question from Tadeusz Lemke. Oh, it's a continuation of the previous question about Bart Simpson. But what if you had to choose between Bart Simpson and Margolis?
Well, I don't think that.
Just tell people who Margolis is first, because many people might have forgotten.
So I have a short story, and in the short story, the boy wants to buy a Bart Simpson doll, and his father who wants to teach him how to save money. He buys him a piggy bank, saying that if he'll save enough coins in it, he'll get him a Bart Simpson doll. And the kid named that piggy bank Margolis, and he becomes such good friends with his piggy bank that he doesn't want it to be broken so he can get his Bart Simpson doll. So for sure, my character is rooting for the piggy bank and not for Bart Simpson. But maybe we can have some kind of wrestling competition between the two, so it will never be a fair fight. In outer space. But we have to remember that Margolis is very fragile. He's a porcelain pig. So Bart can fight him, but he should do it in a merciful way, or at least bring some crazy glue with him so he can glue Margolis back if he wins.
Fair enough. Okay, before we're nearing the 50-minute mark, and at 7, I think there's another event. So we have about 7-8 more minutes. So while I'm waiting for other questions in the chat that might come any minute, I want to ask you, what are you working on right now as we speak? Are you working on something, some exciting new project? Just writing more short stories? The ones about outer space? Yeah, what is it?
Yeah, so I've been writing quite a lot of stories, and also beginning many stories that I don't know how to end. I think that the latest one was about who moved to an upscale apartment building, and basically on the first day there, one of the tenants commits suicide and jumps and falls very close to one of the people in the couple, and those people who fought all their life about getting this apartment that will be their dream apartment, they have to deal with the fact that that now it's the apartment in which somebody jumped from the window and fell on them, and fell next to them. So it's kind of a story of a struggle or dancing tango with karma, when it comes to bigger projects, I'm involved in a few TV projects. There is a TV series that I've written for Israeli TV, which is a supernatural thriller. I'm working with an American Israeli filmmaker, Alma Harel, who did a movie called Honey Boy, on a TV series adaptation of my story Lyland for Amazon Prime. And I'm also working on another kind of TV project, but that is really right now it's mostly in my head and it's not very communicative. It's not very, but it's basically about a guy who works district attorney, mostly dealing with deporting illegal immigrants, who starts having hallucination about him being a world famous porn star.
That's a good one. I can see many different endings. Different opportunities. Oh, just a question came in, just as I expected. It's from Lyudmila Spasova. The opportunities to go to walk in nature right now are close to zero. We are, I think, she says, we are isolated from nature. What do you think about that?
Well, I must say that that I appreciate nature and I appreciate people who appreciate nature, but I'm kind of an urban guy. The first advice I got from my parents was never live on the ground floor because they have snakes there. So for all my life, I lived in the heart of the city, and always like, you know, in apartment buildings. I never lived in a house. But having said that, for me, living in a very urban city, you really see during the lockdowns that even in the cities, nature begins to spread. You know, you see flowers growing up on benches. You see basically in my city, you see many porcupines, you know, or hedgehogs, you know. In the backyards, you see more birds coming in. It's as if that there is no vacuum. The moment that we give a little bit more space, something comes in. I agree that, you know, that with lockdown it's difficult to take your car and go to nature, but at the same time I know that a few of my friends thought, you know, if we're zooming anyway, you know, and we have the possibility to go to a place, you know, in some village and work from there, then why not do that? Again, you know, I don't think it's the best time in the world to go hiking, but I do think that it's one of the best time in the world to see how nature still is being able to take a little holding in our big urban fortresses and put something of the world inside this man-made sphere.
I have a personal question. What have you read or seen in the last few months during the lockdown? Because I'm sure that you've had more time for that. Something that has impressed you. A piece of literature, a piece of art, a film, a movie.
So I want to say that with me it's very funny that in times when I'm more creative, I'm less interested in kind of reading books, seeing movies, because I think that when you read a book or you see a movie, you are being invited into an imaginary world, and I need to leave our world. I can't stay in our universe for too long. But if I'm already inventing one, then the urge is not as strong. You know, I don't want to go anywhere if already have, like, if I make my own pasta, I don't go out for a restaurant. You know, I just eat my pasta and I'm happy with it. So I hardly read. I read very little, but the things that I did do a lot was I watched TV series and movies with my son and with Shira, because during lockdown you look for some kind of a shared activity, and you know, and it's really and you're limited. You know, you can't go anywhere. So we found ourselves kind of reaching, watching all kinds of movies, and many times Lev wants to show us things that he likes, and sometimes he lets us show him things that we like. So we saw the Truman Show, we saw Prestige, the Christopher Nolan film. We even saw Die Hard with Bruce Willis, and all kinds of stuff, like, you know, with the midnight run. And Lev can watch it amazing and say he's smoking on the back of a bus, or they're using a phone with a coin, or all those kind of things that, you know, that were part of me as an older guy's life, but for a 15-year-old they look like science fiction. And it's wonderful to be able to revisit movies that made an impact on you, like, you know, 30 years later with your child, and see what he likes and gets connected to, and what stopped working with time.
How old is he left now? Is he 15 yet?
15, yeah, he had his birthday last week.
Wow, congratulations. When we met for the first time, he was just 7 or maybe 6. Yeah, well, but what about his tastes? Have they started to look more like yours, or is the fact that he comes from a completely different generation, does it make him, you know, like different stuff? You know, I'm experiencing the same thing with my daughter, who is still only 11, but it's a similar kind of voyage. So I hear you very well when you're telling me about trying to bring your tastes, open them up to your child.
So it's amazing because I think that when we love something, there is a part of our love that is very nostalgic and very private and had to do with the fact that we saw a movie with somebody we loved, or that it was close to another experience. And when you watch it with children, sometimes they could be merciless because they have no attachment to it whatsoever. They just see it as a piece. And one thing that I notice is that with Lev, that it's easier to watch really old films than to watch films from the 80s and the 90s, because when you watch those 80s and 90s films, they have all those visual effects that look really, really bad. Because today, when you want to do a fake explosion or a guy falling off a building, you can do it much better than they used to do, and it really aged. While when you watch a movie from the 50s or the 60s, you don't have such a problem because they didn't have ethics, they didn't have special effects, at least not in the way that Hollywood used to have in the 80s and the 90s. And you also see that, for example, when we saw the Truman Show, we talked about this movie, for 2 weeks after that. So you also see that some movies stay with you more than others. There are movies like, I don't know, we watch Jim Carrey, The Masks, and you watch it, you laugh, you have a great time, but 2 days later you will not speak about it. But sometimes, when you see a movie like Prestige that deals with what makes a performer and what makes art and what sacrifices we need to make, then I could find myself talking with Lev about it, like 10 weeks after we saw the film, and it will still be vivid in our minds.
There is one more question, maybe the last one. It's from Stoyanova. She says, lovely to see you, Edgar. My question is, how do you see life after the pandemic? We spoke a little about that, but still, it's a straightforward question.
So I want to say something about the pandemic. One of the things that I first heard people say is that after the pandemic, there will be no physical connection between people because people will be afraid of viruses, so they will not touch each other. And I can say now that after 9 years of living in the pandemic, I can already see that it's not true. Because most people that I meet, I will not touch them and I will keep a safe distance. But when I meet my brother and my best friend, I hug them. And when I hug them, I know that I'm taking a risk. There is a price tag with this hug, but still I hug them. So when I want to think about life after the pandemic, for example, I can imagine that maybe it will be a more sincere place, that I will not give anybody a fake hug. I will not, kiss anybody I don't want to kiss because it would be too dangerous. But that if when we meet, Manol, I give you a big hug and a kiss, you know that I really mean it. You'll
It's
be sure.
mutual. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Well, it's been an hour. So maybe I ask you, do you have some special message to your Bulgarian fans and readers, something to say to close the conversation on a high note?
Just please be patient. Soon. I hope to you see because right now I speak, I see Manol, but I don't see anybody. And for as much as I know, all of you are eating cornflakes and texting while the Zoom is on. So I would be happy to be with you in the same space and to be able to react to you and your bored or happy faces and listen to your questions directly. And I hope that with the vaccines and everything that this would happen in not too long.
You'd better make plans because otherwise we'll find you. We'll come to where you are if you don't come here. I promise. All of us that are listening right now.
This should happen too.
Well, it's been great talking to you. Send my very best regards to Shira and Lev. Have a very fruitful remainder of the year. Happy Hanukkah. It was just 2 days ago, I think.
Happy Christmas and give a big hug to your entire family.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I now pass the floor back to Nadezhda. Thanks to everyone who has been listening and watching us and asking questions. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks to both of you.